I need to talk to you about what is shaping up to be one of the most significant pattern changes we have seen this winter season. And what I'm seeing in the data right now tells me that we are entering a period where Arctic cold is going to dominate large portions of the United States for an extended stretch. We just came off a major winter storm that dumped heavy snow and ice across the East Coast and the southern states, and now we're transitioning into something that could be even more impactful in terms of the cold. I'm talking about temperatures that are going to plunge well below zero in some areas, and we're looking at the potential for multiple rounds of snow over the next 7 to 10 days. This isn't a short-lived cold snap. This is a pattern shift that's going to lock in place, and it's being driven by changes in the jet stream and potentially even the polar vortex. I'm going to walk you through exactly what's happening, why this is different from what we've seen so far this winter, and what you need to be prepared for as we move deeper into February. Let me start by talking about the winter storm that just impacted us over the weekend. We saw significant snowfall across portions of North Carolina, Virginia, and areas back through the Ohio Valley. North Carolina in particular got hit hard, with some locations picking up 12 to 18 inches of snow. The Charlotte area saw some of the highest totals, and even areas near Raleigh picked up significant accumulation. However, there were some locations that underperformed compared to what we were forecasting, and that was largely due to what meteorologists call a dry slot. Essentially, there was a zone where the moisture got cut off temporarily, and some areas that were expecting heavy snow ended up with less than anticipated. Now, as we move forward from here, the focus is shifting toward the cold, and I'm not talking about just cold temperatures. I'm talking about an Arctic blast that's going to be historic in nature for this time of year. We have a massive dome of Arctic air that's building over central Canada right now, and this air mass is going to surge south over the next few days. By Wednesday, February 4th, we're going to start seeing temperatures plummet across the northern plains and the upper Midwest. By Thursday and Friday, February 5th and 6th, that Arctic air is going to spread all the way down into the southeast, and we're looking at temperatures that are going to be 20 to 30 degrees below normal across a huge portion of the country. What makes this Arctic blast particularly noteworthy is how far south it's going to penetrate. We're not just talking about cold weather in places like Minnesota and North Dakota where you expect it. We're talking about record-breaking cold, potentially reaching all the way down into Florida. I'm talking about overnight low temperatures in the mid to upper 20s across northern Florida, and even areas in central Florida could drop into the low 30s. For cities like Tallahassee, Gainesville, and Jacksonville, we could be looking at some of the coldest temperatures they've seen in years. Orlando could potentially drop into the mid-30s, which would be exceptionally cold for early February. This kind of cold in Florida is going to create serious concerns for agriculture, particularly citrus crops. But Florida isn't the only area in the southeast that's going to see exceptional cold. Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina are all going to experience well below normal temperatures. Atlanta could see overnight lows in the single digits or low teens, which combined with any remaining snow and ice on the ground from the weekend storm is going to create prolonged hazardous conditions. The Carolinas, especially areas that just picked up significant snowfall, are going to see that snow stick around for a while because temperatures are going to remain below freezing for multiple consecutive days. Now let me talk about what's driving this pattern change. We're seeing a significant shift in the jet stream pattern. The jet stream is essentially a river of fast-moving air in the upper atmosphere that steers weather systems, and the position and orientation of the jet stream has a huge impact on what kind of weather we experience at the surface. Over the past few weeks, the jet stream has been in a pattern that allowed multiple winter storms to develop and track across the southern and eastern United States. But now, we're seeing that jet stream pattern break down and reorganize into a configuration that's going to allow Arctic air to plunge much farther south than it has been able to up until this point. Specifically, we're seeing what's called an amplified pattern developing, where the jet stream takes on a very wavy configuration with deep troughs and strong ridges. When you get a deep trough positioned over the eastern United States, it acts like a pipeline for Arctic air to flow south out of Canada. And that's exactly what we're looking at over the next week. We're going to have a deep trough digging into the eastern half of the country, and that's going to allow multiple surges of Arctic air to push south. There's also something else I need to mention, and that's the potential for what's called a sudden stratospheric warming event. The polar vortex is a large area of low pressure and cold air that sits over the Arctic, and it's normally quite stable during the winter months. However, under certain conditions, the polar vortex can become disrupted. One way this happens is through a sudden stratospheric warming event, where temperatures in the stratosphere over the Arctic rapidly increase. When this occurs, it can cause the polar vortex to weaken or even split apart. And when the polar vortex weakens or splits, it allows Arctic air to spill out into the mid-latitudes, including the United States. Now, I want to be clear that we're not definitively seeing a major sudden stratospheric warming event right now, but there are some signals in the data that suggest it's a possibility over the next couple of weeks. If this does occur, it would support the idea that we're going to see sustained cold weather across much of the United States deep into February and potentially even into early March. Let me walk you through the timeline for the next several days. Today is February 2nd, and we're in a relatively quiet period right now in terms of active weather. As we go into Tuesday, February 3rd, temperatures are going to start dropping more noticeably across the northern tier of the country. The northern plains and upper Midwest are going to see high temperatures struggling to get above zero in many locations, and overnight lows could drop to 20 or even 30 below zero in some areas. By Wednesday, February 4th, that Arctic air is going to start pushing farther south. The Ohio Valley is going to see temperatures plummet, with high temperatures only reaching the teens or low 20s in cities like Cincinnati, Louisville, and Indianapolis. Overnight lows are going to drop into the single digits or below zero. This is also when we're going to start seeing the cold really take hold across the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Cities like Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York are going to see high temperatures in the 20s, which is well below normal for early February. Thursday and Friday, February 5th and 6th, are when the cold reaches its peak intensity across the Southeast. This is when we're going to see those record-breaking cold temperatures I mentioned earlier in Florida and across the Deep South. Atlanta is going to wake up to temperatures in the single digits or low teens. The Carolinas are going to see widespread single-digit temperatures. And even areas along the Gulf Coast are going to experience temperatures in the 20s and low 30s. This is exceptionally cold for these regions. Now, as we look ahead to the weekend and into next week, the cold is going to persist, but we're also going to have to start watching for additional snow chances. The pattern we're moving into is one that's very conducive to what meteorologists call Alberta clippers. These are fast-moving storm systems that drop south out of Canada, and while they typically don't produce huge amounts of snow, they can bring quick bursts of snow that create travel problems. We're looking at the potential for one or more of these systems to affect the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast over the upcoming weekend and into early next week. Specifically, I'm watching the time frame of Saturday, February 7th through Monday, February 9th for potential snow across areas like Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and New York. We're not talking about a major snowstorm at this point, but we could see several inches of accumulation in some areas. And with temperatures remaining so cold, any snow that falls is going to stick around. Looking even farther ahead into the middle part of February, the pattern remains very uncertain. But there are some signals that we could see an even more significant Arctic outbreak around February 12th through 15th. This is still a ways out, and confidence is low on the specifics, but the overall pattern suggests that we're going to remain in a very cold regime for at least the next 2 weeks. There's also the potential for a more significant storm system to develop during this time frame, possibly bringing heavy snow to portions of the Midwest or East Coast. What I can tell you is that February is not going to be a warm month. We started the month with a major winter storm, and we're now transitioning into a period of exceptional cold that's going to affect a huge portion of the country. And based on what we're seeing in the long-range models, this cold pattern is likely to persist for much of the month. We could see multiple rounds of snow, ongoing cold temperatures, and generally harsh winter conditions across much of the eastern two-thirds of the United States. I want to emphasize how serious this prolonged cold is going to be, especially for areas that don't typically experience temperatures this low. If you're in the Southeast, particularly Florida, Georgia, or the Carolinas, you need to take precautions to protect pipes, bring in any sensitive plants, and ensure you have adequate heating. Power demand is going to be very high, and while widespread outages aren't expected from the cold alone, localized issues could occur. For areas farther north, this is the kind of cold that requires serious preparation. Make sure vehicles are winterized. Make sure you have emergency supplies in case you get stranded. Check on elderly neighbors who may be more vulnerable to the cold. And if you're planning to travel over the next week, understand that conditions are going to be challenging with the combination of cold temperatures, residual snow and ice on the roads, and the potential for additional snow from clipper systems. The bottom line is that we're entering what could be the most sustained and severe cold outbreak of the winter season so far. This is a pattern shift that's going to impact tens of millions of people, and it's going to create conditions that some areas haven't experienced in years. The next 7 to 10 days are going to be brutal across much of the country, and you need to be prepared for that. Winter is far from over. In fact, it's about to get a lot more intense. I'll continue to provide updates as this pattern evolves. Thank you for trusting me to provide you with the latest information on this major weather pattern change. Stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next forecast.